Hi to everybody, and the water in me honors the water in you. So my prayer is also just me talking about how I view water. We view water. We view this world. Everything that we see is actually seen through water because our eye lens is 99% water. As you're probably aware, by molecular count, we're 99% beings of water. And one Indigenous woman once said to me, she said that she could speak to bees and she would watch the hive for long periods of time. And the bees came out and they said, we don't mind you watching our hive, but please don't watch it for too long because your consciousness is putting too much light into our hive and we need it to be a little more dim. And so that then brought me into the understanding that where we put our conscious expression is also where we're putting our light. And so for right now, what I'd love for us to do is to put our conscious expression and our light into our water and into the water of our own body. Because I think that's one of the saddest things that we do is we don't identify ourselves as bodies of water. We see ourselves with these liquid eyes, but we see the solid body. But if your skin was invisible, you would see what absolute fluid systems we are. So as we put our conscious light into our water, I would like to say thank you. Thank you to this blood of Mother Nature. Thank you to the conscious expression of love and light that water resonates at. Thank you for our healing. And thank you for being in so many states, in so many worlds, and in so many expressions. And thank you for the different colors. And that's the thing. I love when I think about water because water is so transparent and it reflects all colors and all life and all images. So within that aspect, I would like to be mindful of the last thing we say before we drink our water. Because in the tests that I've done, saliva holds information based on the last word you said. So when you say something, it's held in your mouth. And then when you drink, that water is actually touching and feeling and expressing in the resonance of that word. So whatever word you might like to choose, thank you is always a nice one. And then just drink some water. And that's creating a sacred space from the very first place that the water will touch inside of you. It's a very intimate thing we do, drink water. So thank you, thank you, thank you to everybody here.
Thank you. Cheers.
Alrighty. So I've got lots to share, and some will be visual, and some will be me talking. And feel free to, if you've got a question, to jump in. I mean, this can be as interactive as you like it to be. So I'm just going to start really with a little bit of a slideshow because my work is very visual. So I've been working as a water researcher for coming up to 9 years, and my area of expertise is in crystallography. And I have a very specific technique. In the beginning, I used to completely freeze water because I didn't really know any better. But now my technique of freezing is short term. It takes under 5 minutes, and I teach people how to do it so others can also have this experience that I've had. So I'll start with just a share on my screen over here. And we can, I think it's just good to have that actual visual. So this was me over 20-something years ago. So I was in this horrendous car accident. We went under a 7-ton truck, rolled twice, and the driver was decapitated. It was one of the worst accidents in New Zealand where someone survived. And I had 8 surgeries over the course of 20 years. And on the 8th surgery, doctors told me that I hadn't recovered well and that I had blood clots in my lungs, showers of blood clots in my lungs. And he wanted me to be on warfarin, which is a blood thinner. So bearing in mind, I've never drunk alcohol, I've never done any recreational or otherwise drugs other than what they gave me from the car accident. I've been vegetarian since I was 8. I've never smoked a cigarette, and I've always lived a really holistic life. So it was not something I was really wanting to embrace by having to take blood thinners. But I did it for 3 months, and then I decided I was going to become the guinea pig of my own health. And the showers were gone by then of clots, and a doctor friend of mine said, if you can find a natural source of high alkaline water, emphasis on natural, then that might be able to help stabilize my blood. So I started drinking lots of different waters that were of a higher alkalinity, so around between a 7.5 up to an 8.8. And for 2 weeks, I trialed my body on these. I'll just come out of this one for a second, actually, and just whilst I share that. So for 2 weeks, I really, for each different type of water, I gave it a really good go. So I didn't change my diet, and I didn't do anything like that. And so, other than feeling hydrated, I didn't notice a huge difference. And then I had a wellness center. And one of my clients came and said to me, I know this old guy, he has his own private water source and he's only giving the water to cancer patients. Maybe you'd like to try. Out of the ground, the pH or potential of hydrogen is 9.9, which was one of the highest, most natural alkaline waters I'd heard of. So he gave me a month's worth to try. And on day 3, I noticed something of which a lot of people don't want to talk about, but since I've been talking to so many doctors and scientists of late, it doesn't faze me in the slightest anymore, which is bowel motions. And given that I had had bowel surgery, it was very relevant. So on day 3, I noticed that things were working really well. And in the world today, so many people are trying to, sitting on the toilet for an hour trying to push a pebble out, and that's just not normal. We are really a dehydrated kind of society. And so on day 10, I noticed these little bumps coming along my arm and on my jaw, which were really painful. And one in particular was like really angry, and as gross as it sounds, I got some tweezers and I started like digging into my arm because it felt like there was something in there. And I pulled out this little bit of glass. Between day 10 and 12, 27 pieces of green glass came out of my arm and jaw. And for me, I mean, that was like mind-blowing. The reason they were green was because the man who was in that car accident over 20 years ago to that, he had a nightclub, and in the back of his car were crates of Steiner beer, which are green. And when we rolled, I'd gone like this. So this side of my body had copped all of that glass. And so when that happened, I was like, how on earth can water purge me of this glass? How was that possible? And I gave some to my dad. He's this great big Maori guy. And he's very well known. He's a fishing personality on TV in New Zealand, and he had got this fish fin, that spike that had gone up between his fingers, years and years beforehand. When he started drinking my water, or the water I discovered that helped heal me, he thought he'd got it all out, but this fossilized bit of spike started to come out from between his knuckles. And I'm like, how is this working? And then I trialed with these people in my wellness center, from very, very healthy athletic people to very, very unwell. And everybody noticed an improvement in their energy. Everybody's eyesight improved. One person had to change their prescription on their glasses. And So all these interesting things started to happen. And that then made me very curious, like how could this, why is this water making this happen? Like what's different about it? So outside of its high pH, I looked into its analysis, which is a logical place to go, of course. And it had high bicarb, it had various minerals, blah, blah, blah. But that didn't seem to be quite enough to answer the question of how could it purge my body in such a way. And I like to look at the world in a threefold approach: science, art, and consciousness. I think that there is an interweave which works that to give you a much broader point of view when you look at the world that way. And so I looked to Tesla, who said if you want to know the secrets of the universe, look to energy, frequency, and vibration. And so when I looked into the analysis of this water, I realized I was looking at what water held. But what did I know about water? In fact, like, what is water? And what do we really even know about water? We don't actually even know where water came from. The science isn't defined as to either it came from meteorites and asteroids or it came from some inner layer of the Earth's mantle. The jury's out, but either way, humans haven't been to either. So this is an essentially alien substance of which we cannot live without. And when we look for life on other planets, we're always looking for water. But we never define water as being alive. And so I started to become more curious, thinking, well, I think I am missing something here. And that was the time when a couple of people kind of came into my awareness that really spurred on my journey of water research and the relationship between water and consciousness. So what I discovered was this. So outside of my car accident, and what I will say is that 3 doctors told me after this accident that I would never be able to have children. So I had 3 for every doctor that told me I couldn't, because I hate being told what I can't do. And so these are the people you, I'm sure, would know about Emoto's work. His work was very much seen in contrast. So this is one of those examples. Although the scientific world didn't embrace Emoto, many, many individuals did. Because what he really did was open the doorway for us to see ourselves as bodies of water that are sensitive to external information, our environment, and our thoughts. So I think that he really pioneered a way in for people to become much more comfortable with the idea that water can store information. The next person who I resonate with tremendously and who has actually become a good friend of mine, his name's Laurent Costa. He too takes microscopic photographs of water, but unlike Emoto, Laurent didn't want to influence the water. He didn't want to get in the way of water's conversation with him, shall we say. And so he was seeing photos like these, of hearts, of smiley faces. And these are microscopic photos that really make you feel something. So I worked professionally as an artist for, around about 13, 14 years. So I see the world from a very artistic point of view. So for me, when I see happy faces, they make me feel happy. They're so cute. And I'm like, oh, that's really unique. And the pictures were always relative to something going on in his life. And so one of the examples was that he said he looked down into the water and smiled at it before he did these tests. And so water's smiling back at him. And so that he definitely influenced me a lot. The next person is a man by the name of Thomas Hieronymus, and he was a radionic engineer. And he observed something that was very interesting and intriguing. He observed that when he went into a Parisian meat market, he noticed that the freshly placed organs of an animal appeared to be affecting the way the frost froze on the glass behind where they were placed. For example, the frost would freeze in the shape of a liver above the liver organ, and so on and so forth. And this was really remarkable because what he thought, his hypothesis, was that there appeared to be some kind of life force energy still emanating out of these organs. And he put that down to there being water in the blood. And the water was communicating with the water in the air and sharing its structural information. And so he was seeing this with his naked eye, which was very encouraging for me because back then I didn't have a microscope. But I did have some amazing water, and I had a glass petri dish. And so I had this thought that I would simply project some kind of conscious expression into the water via a thought and freeze it, because the common denominator for all of these three people's work was the freezing aspect. So I always say there's this saying that water, that nature keeps her secrets well. She hides them well. And what I see is that in this particular situation, it is in this realm where the invisible becomes visible through freezing. And so I got my petri dish with the water in, and I basically found that there was a little bit of fluff floating around in my petri dish of water. So I was like, oh God. So I put my hand in to take the fluff out, consciously thinking, I wonder if my hand will have any impact at all on the water's quote-unquote memory, because back then I really didn't know other than what I had read, and I like to discover things for myself. So that was the thought that was projected into the water. I put it into my freezer with the peas and broccoli and ice cream, forgot about it for a few hours, pulled it out, held it up to the light, and you can see how big this petri dish is in comparison to my hand here. And I took a photo on my iPhone. And this was the photo that appeared, that this is the image in the ice. And it took up half of that petri dish. So it's interesting because I have slightly bent fingers that I inherited from my mother, and you can see that the fingers are not perfect in this photo. And it kind of freaked me out when I first saw it because it kind of looks like an X-ray. And so I showed my son, who didn't know what I'd done, and I said, hey, Rama, what does this look like? And he looked at me like I was silly, and he said, oh, it's a hand, Mum. It's kind of a creepy hand, but it's a hand. And then I thought, well, yeah, it really does look like that, but maybe it's a coincidence. So I went down to the beach, and I got some seawater, and I froze that. And so you can see the outline of the fish with the perfectly round eye and the fins and the tail. It's more feathery because salt water freezes differently to fresh water. But then I became more and more aware that water likes to design an imagery. And my freezer became my most used household appliance. And so I mentioned earlier that my technique changed. So those two images you just saw were when my technique was in purely freezing water. So some of the images you're going to see now are using my latest technique that I call CMP, which stands for Collective Molecular Photography, suggesting that the molecules of water are working as a kind of collective, like pixels do for a photo. So I wanted to see if water could recognize facial features, like facial recognition. So I put my petri dish of water on top of my friend Wendy's photo for 30 seconds. People always ask me why 30. I just happen to like it. It certainly doesn't have to be that long. And some people think, how could it be so short? But 30 seconds is the number I like to use. And then I remove it. I put it into my freezer using my technique. Now my technique is essentially where I'm capturing the first freeze. As water freezes, it freezes in layers. And so what I wanted to do as I became more and more familiar with the new science of water and studied my friend and mentor's work, Dr. Gerald Pollack, around the fourth phase of water, which is sort of the stage in between molecular chaos and molecular order. So I call it the stage of creation. And so it is a very interesting place when you begin to observe how water begins to freeze. So I would open my freezer earlier and earlier and earlier to see what I was missing. And what I saw was that the informed water, the water is that has picked up the information that you've given it first, adheres to the bottom of the glass petri dish before any of the other water does. So the stage where I am photographing it in is where there is an ice at the bottom of the dish and liquid on top. And I tip away the liquid and I photograph the crystalline architecture that's on the ice, on the bottom of the petri dish. And so this is my friend Laurent Costa. He sent me this photo and said, please show this to water. And you can see it's designed his features. Now in this one, this was an in-between stage, in between that kind of totally freezing water and my technique, so it's not quite as clear as some of the others. Someone asked me to do a picture of Sadhguru, and so you can see that his face has appeared in the ice. This is my friend Igor. I met him at the annual water conference in Germany in 2019, and he said I could use his photo. These are my children. It's blue because when I teach in schools, I suggest sometimes that the children can use natural colouring because it's kind of fun. It helps define the patterns. But you can see that in my daughter's, where my daughter is on the left, there's a spiral where her ear is. So water is very expressive in the way in which it can design. But you can clearly see their two faces. I've used coins. Roman coins. You can see that it has definitely picked up that design, and although this water was slightly a bit too frozen, you can still see that the faces are coming through. So this is what those two types of water and water look like. There is the ice and there's the liquid. When you tip the liquid away, there is the crystallography. You're wanting to capture that first freeze because just like those glue and glitter pictures you may have done when you were little, where you're given a piece of paper and a glue stick and you draw a picture with the glue stick and then you sprinkle the glitter on top, then some of the glitter will like stick to the glue, and then you tip the whole thing up and you shake it and the rest of the glitter falls away. This is exactly what's happening, except that the glue is your conscious expression and the water is attracted to that. So within that prayer, I mentioned about the lady that said that your conscious expression gives more light to things. Well, I also think that when you have that conscious relationship or expression going into water, it allows the water to absorb more light, which also helps it build a more of an exclusion zone, which goes into the fourth phase of water. As a complete side note, I've done 4.5 years of work studying egg albumin. And the left one shows what free-range egg albumin should look like, and that compares it to battery farm chicken egg albumin, which I think is a very interesting thing to observe, because I always thought what would be the most informed human fluid, and it's got to be amniotic fluid. And so I think this is a very interesting insight into the life that goes on within an egg and the information we can learn. So this is just showing my new and old technique and how you can see the difference. There's so much more clarity. The new technique is showing, my son did this actually. He projected the thought of an arrow because his name is Rama, and Lord Rama in Sanskrit and in the ancient Hindu texts, he always has an arrow, a bow and arrow. And so he projected a thought of an arrow into the water, and you can see that water has been able to design it to look as if it's absolutely metallic. So I'll just quickly fly through some of these. You can see what I've done on the right, and you can see the frozen expression on the left. So they're fairly self-explanatory. This is interesting because the butter knife was the focused test, but on either side the coasters were there, and they were not meant to be part of anything, they just happened to be there. But you can see that on the left that water has also picked them up. which suggests that water is able to observe things in a vastly different way than we may have appreciated. Because what we can't see in this photo is that there is water in the air. And I think that that's vastly overlooked. This one I just placed the petri dish of water on some grass. So this is a handful of some of my work. I have 32,000 photos of water doing this, so it's really way too many to show you all. You can see what I've done for a lot of these. There's stories behind each one, and it would take a long time to go into all of them. The top right, though, with the baby is interesting because I invited a woman who was newly pregnant to sip some water and think of her baby, which she did. And you can see how much it looks like the embryo at the stage of pregnancy that she was actually at. And it just kind of carries on. I use all different number of inspiring influences from media, words, thoughts. I talk to water, all kinds of things. And I keep seeing these expressions of understanding and comprehension, which are really nothing short of remarkable. So I always say that art is the heart of water because it loves to design. So with these next pictures, there are some words in our language of which, even if we were to try to draw them, we would struggle. Free energy is one of them. How does it look? I didn't know what water might show me, but it showed a pyramid which looks like emanating geometry coming out of the top. What I've learnt with this particular image is this is not random. I have now got 34, I think nearly 35 what I term of hydroglyphs. They're frozen glyphs in that water is able to use its building blocks of ice to design that are not random. When I write the word free energy, this is actually the image that I see. To say I have one hydroglyph, I have to have used the same word influence and seen the same symbol appear at least 50 times. Therefore, I know that is what it means. But what I've discovered is that there are layers of meaning. And I have people around the world helping me discover these. And we're starting to actually learn something entirely new that is, I feel like an infant among gods as I do this work, because I feel like I know nothing and I'm trying to learn an entirely new language. So ego is a difficult one for people to draw perhaps, but just the word ego, what is designed, the big shoulders, the neck, a big inflated head, and a little face, which is very interesting because this is like an artistic expression of something which could be discussed over and over and over again about what it can mean. I used the same water, I put it into the same sized petri dishes. I wrote contemplation on a piece of paper and expansion on another piece of paper. That was the only difference, was the words. I put them both into the freezer at the same time, pulled them out. My daughter helped me take the photos and hold the dishes up. And what you can see is something very relative to each word. I thought that was very interesting. I wrote the letters I, V, F. And to anyone that doesn't know what that means, it could be a totally alien kind of a thing. Who knows what those letters are? But water has designed the needle going through into what looks like an egg. So one of the things that has been a very interesting part of my work was people say, well, is it your conscious expression that's impacting the water, or does water have a sovereign voice? It's a very interesting thought. So I thought, well, how can I get my conscious expression out of the way? I thought, well, that's what dreaming is. So I've done a whole study where I have left a petri dish of water beside my bed with the intention that the water captures some part of my dream. And then when I freeze it in the morning, I'll be able to see what that is. And so I dream very vividly, and I usually am able to remember my dreams. But after doing this work, on the odd occasion, if I forget, I'll see the image in the ice and it will bring back the entire dream. So I'm only going to give you a handful of examples of the dream work, but in this one I dreamt that I was in a sailboat and the waves were like crazy big and it felt like it was going on forever. And you can see that there's a sailboat and big waves. And this probably came in my subconscious, picked up around Sweet Tooth, because I was watching the series with my son, and so water designed the this kind of animal baby human. This one, and you will see that there are different colors that come through my work. It's such a thin layer of ice, and because I like the colors to come through, it's almost like water is a watercolor artist. It uses the colors in the background to help design what it wants. So I'm just explaining why you'll see that. But I dreamt that I heard this squeaky little meow, and I looked around and saw this tiny little baby animal that looked like a half cat and half otter. And I picked it up and went to go take it to its mother. And then I found the mother, and it was feeding these babies. Basically, long story short, you can see how silky that looks in the ice, and it really does look like a creature. So, communication and connection. Do you know my name? The image on the right is how I link my initials. I never showed water that. That was not part of this test whatsoever. I actually just said, "Do you know my name?" And water designed my initials. I've done it a couple of times now. Actually, I've done it about 3. I have to update this one. So it's very interesting. My mum died in 1999, and I wanted to see if water could connect to her, or she could connect to water and have water communicate through itself somehow to me. And so when I lived in Japan, we would write letters to each other. And at the end of every letter, my mother would attempt to draw a circle. Her circles were absolute rubbish, and she'd be the first to tell you that. They always looked like misshapen rotis. And in the middle of that, she would draw a little heart. And so this was the image that I got after asking water to connect to my mum. Now I actually, on her birthday, every year I ask the same question, and I have 4 beautiful images of misshapen circles with hearts in the middle now. So it's very special and suggests that water can reach far, far more realms than we could have ever imagined. I did the same thing for a friend. He's a big water guy, and he asked me to leave 2 petri dishes of water out for people around the world to project their birthday wishes to him and their love to him and to the water. What he didn't know is that I did a 3rd dish, and I knew his father had passed, and I said, "Could you please connect to my friend's dad?" And I left all those petri dishes out overnight because he wanted everyone from around the world to project their thoughts. When I came out in the morning, what I noticed was something really weird. The 2 dishes that he knew about still had the same amount of water in them, but the water where I'd asked for his dad to connect with him, the water had evaporated so much there was hardly any water in the dish, and I still don't have an explanation for how that could have happened. And so I just froze what was left, and all of the water froze into this heart. I've done a ton of repeat studies. So the sound of Om, so I love to use music because I don't know what life would be without sound and music. And so you can see that the sound of Om creates these kind of circular, almost like rings of a tree. I used the song Stairway to Heaven, which was the first reason that I stumbled upon this work with hydroglyphs. So over the course of many years, I really wanted to see if water could express what it would do with different genres of music. Because in Emoto's work, he really showed a very contrast between heavy metal and classical music, and I would like to suggest that whoever did that test probably wasn't into heavy metal. But I have never known water to be in judgment. I've only known people to be in judgment. And so when my son, my oldest son, he said, Mum, I don't even like classical music. I don't want to really listen to it all day long. I like rap. Does that mean that the water's going to hate it? And I'm like, no. We're all expressions of the divine. We're on purpose. It's not random that we're here. And so I went on this mission I did some Tupac and Biggie Smalls, and I did some drumming, and I did like electronic music and some metal and some like Bob Marley and all different kinds. And so when I did Stairway to Heaven, I did many of these, but I kept seeing the stairway, and after a number of times I started to think, gosh, does that actually mean stairway? And so I wrote the word stairway and used my technique, and I got a stairway. And then I did it again and again, and then I did it 50 times. And this was my first word, stairway. And so what's very interesting is how it overlaps with hieroglyphs. Now, hieroglyphs are a picture language that were not designed to be spoken. They were designed to be felt. They also suggested a concept rather than one word. And so what's interesting about this work is I then thought, well, what do you do with a stairway? You climb up it. So I wrote the words to climb up, and again, I got the stairway. And then I started to understand that there are layers of meaning within these glyphs. And then I started using different words and getting different repeatable patterns. Love is one of them. You can love is in many forms, and it always designs itself in a heart. This is gratitude. Gratitude and living always form in these beautiful hexagonal patterns. And when they come together, you start to learn how to read hieroglyphs. The heart inside of a hexagon means love lives in gratitude. When you start to see that water has a kind of, a symbolic language in the way that I'm doing, you just have to really start to wonder what we haven't been seeing and what we've been missing. This is the hieroglyph for creation. I'm going to show you some more of the actual hieroglyphs in a minute, but this is one where I have a private Facebook group for people that are actively using my technique. There's around about 300 people in the group. It's basically like a giant study showing that different people can see different things. And so this one man here, he had taught his daughter how to do it. And so he posted this. And this was before he knew anything about this language I was talking about. And so I said, hey, could you please tell your daughter to be careful climbing up something? Because the two that I've outlined there are called the dagger glyph, which is like a thing to be careful. And then the ladder is to climb up. And so he immediately got back to me, and he said, lol, he said, tomorrow we're going to this place called Go Ape, where we're going to be climbing up in the trees and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. This is crazy that she got this. And so he said, I'll make sure to tell her to be careful. Now this is something you may or may not know about. Viktor Schauberger, I'm sure you all would probably know who he was. What's interesting about his experience is that it's very much overlapping in mine, only in a slightly different way. He said, as time passed, I began to play a game with water's secret powers. I surrendered my so-called free consciousness and allowed the water to take possession of it for a while. And little by little, this game turned into a profoundly earnest endeavor, because I realized that one could detach one's own consciousness from the body and attach it to that of the water. And when my own consciousness was eventually returned to me, then the water's most deeply concealed psyche often revealed the most extraordinary things to me. As a result of this investigation, a researcher was born who could dispatch his consciousness on a voyage of discovery, as it were. And in this way, I was able to experience things that had escaped other people's notice, because they were unaware that a human being is able to send forth his free consciousness into those places the eyes cannot see. And by practicing this blindfolded vision, I eventually developed a bond with mysterious nature, whose essential being I then slowly learnt to perceive and understand. So he would fall unconscious when he was watching a stream, and when he came back awake, the water had shared intimate information about itself. And it's one of the ways in which Viktor Schauberger was able to do the work that he did, even down to, I think, the anti-gravity devices that he ended up developing later in his life. And that's my book. So I'm going to just come out of this and... Oh, okay. So, and go here. Excuse my giant thing of
images.
Millions of things here. So I was going to show you a few of these, just so you can see. Just move that over here and me over there.
So beautiful.
Yeah, so this is the tree of life, which means wholeness. And it potentially, when I say it potentially has these meanings, it means that I've done that, seen the images, but I haven't done 50 yet. So I'm going to squiz through a few of them. They're fascinating. Like, here's 62 examples of the lotus glyph, which looks like this. It means purity and enlightenment. This is to cleanse. Here we have the free energy glyph. I like to associate it with something in nature, like this web. The magic wand means magic. The heart means love. The ring means sacred union, and it also means marriage, and it's very 3D, and it looks metallic, much like when dolphins play with these water bubbles. It looks metallic. This fern hexagon means living. Now, here's an interesting thing I learnt, and I won't go through all the rest because there really are a lot of them. But a man about a year ago reached out to me and asked me if, he said he'd been told he only has a few years to live, a few months to live, and could I please see what water had to say about the word death. And when I wrote the word death, I kept seeing the life glyph. And I'm like, oh, that can't be right. That's strange. And so I kept doing it over and over and over and over again, more than 50 times, kept seeing the life glyph, the living glyph. And then it occurred to me, of course, the word death is not a mistake. Water views death as a transition of life, like liquid to gas. Water never dies, it simply transitions. And so when you look at these examples, I have so many more, but I have to try to make it so that people can actually still view them. There is this idea that really water doesn't die. So the word death to it is simply a transition. This is an important one that we've all seen. Everyone that's done this work has seen these. This is called the message glyph. Essentially, it says that there is a message for you. But what's interesting is that, and one of the reasons it can be sometimes so overwhelming, is that, for example, here you can see inside this message glyph is all of this information. And I think this on its own is also potentially a message. But trying to understand how that is and what that means is going to be a lifetime of work, which is why I'm asking for help, and people are helping me. Pre and post Easter, really interesting one. Why would I ever do that? Why would I ever want to know what pre and post Easter mean? So what's interesting is that I wanted to see if water would give me any time frame, see if time is real. And so it wouldn't. It wouldn't do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. Wasn't interested in that. I tried Waitangi Day, which is a public holiday in New Zealand. I tried Christmas. I tried Easter, and I got nothing. Like, maybe it just doesn't want to deal with that right now, or it doesn't recognize that. And then the lady that's doing a mini-series about me and my work, she was the director for a series called Magical Egypt, so she's very familiar with hieroglyphs. And she said, well, why don't you do before and after an event? because there's all this build-up that happens, kind of like a wedding. There's all this build-up before the wedding, then there's the wedding, and then there's the marriage after that. So I'm like, well, that's a pretty good idea. Let's try that. So for before and after Christmas, I got nothing. But when I did before and after Easter, I'm like, oh, that's a definite cross, but it's got this interesting line going from the top to the side. I wonder what that means. I got that for pre-Easter. So when I was looking for something in nature to relate it to, I couldn't find anything. Someone in my private Facebook group sent me this. So there was these people called the Gildry who would design this reversed 4 to show that they were the carpenters or the designers of the work, which I found really curious. But post-Easter is simply the cross. And it potentially also means spring. So I'm like, oh, that's interesting, because I've now also got winter. So what is it showing me? Seasons, and it's showing me a time frame of before and after Easter for something specific for humanity at this point, but I don't really know why. It's relative to now, but it's something for us to be mindful of, I suppose. This is imagination. I mean, there is just so many. And then the really, it's trying to like get into then what does it mean and how to read them. And so this is like, there's just so much. I mean, honestly, there's so much. I had a cell biologist actually on the other day on one of my workshops, and when she saw the word for infection, how it is revealed, she said, oh my God, I had to take a double look because that looks just like dead cells. There's always this black in the middle of a dead cell. So that was really interesting for me. So there's many words, and then it's like going into how to read them. But this is one of my favorites, which means creation. And so where are we?
Veda, have you ever just asked water for the hieroglyph of water?
Yeah, it's this one. So it's this. It's the seedless glyph. So here's what's interesting is as we go through, there are 4 stages of creation, of the word creation. Sorry, there's just so many here. So this is the creation glyph, which essentially it means fire. When it's got these 2 seeds, that's how you know it's the fire or creation glyph. When it's this one, it has no seeds, so it's water. When it's like this, it means air. It's the feathering. And when it's like the speckle, it's earth. So I see that out of the creation glyph comes these, and they're all related to it. You sometimes see all of them even in one dish, which is very, very interesting. And so I find that there's so much more to learn. And what I've also found is that when you, and this is, and I'm saying this mainly because I find it really interesting. It's been quite a topical thing for this week of podcasts I've been talking about. But, you know, I mentioned that I'm doing this work with egg albumin, which is like an amniotic fluid. And so when I've been in the States, and I've come out here lots of times, I've been quite dismayed because when I've used eggs, even if they've said that they're free range, but I've bought them from a store, they've only ever shown 1 pattern, and you should be able to see at least 6 patterns in free range eggs. Certainly in New Zealand, where we don't have as many potential environmental problems perhaps, or something like that, or the soil is still good. All of these things make a difference. But I went out to this place in the weekend where I gave a talk, and the lady there is a biodynamic grower. She also has an organic farm, and the chickens were free range. And I got some of her eggs, and I tested them, and I'm like, oh wow, here are the 6 beautiful patterns that I see. I mean, finally I see something beautiful. But when you put the free range eggs beside eggs which have been like caged, simply by proximity, what I observed is that the crystallography of the caged eggs started to improve. And so it's like this bioresonance that actually the really healthy, healed, well information within that egg had an influence over the one which didn't. And I've seen the same thing with tap water. If you get tap water, which tends to form a specific structure, it doesn't form structure, that's what I mean. It's like kind of disordered lines and dots and stuff. And then you take spring water, for example, that you've collected yourself. Sometimes it can be one giant hexagon in a petri dish. And so you can see the structural differences, similar to egg white. And so if you have one sitting side by side, tap water sitting right next to beautiful spring water, I used the spring water that helped heal my body, which had a really high pH. Firstly, the next day, you're going to see a massive structural difference in the tap water, but I even noticed a pH rise in the tap water, just from sitting next to a high pH water. So there is a transference of information, which also links in with Luc Montagneu's work, which you may have heard of, about his DNA teleportation. And then you think about what it is to be a human being. What is it? We are bodies of water, minerals, and consciousness. And so if we consider that if we really want to make the greatest change in the world, if we work on ourselves and we allow ourselves to be the vessel that is filled with love and light and a positive vibration, just being that is going to help heal other people that are nearby us, that we're close to. And so I remember being in India, and my teacher said that the greatest saints of the world had such a high vibration that they could reach people that they would never meet, because their energetic, their bioresonance would reach people far, far away. And so I think it's there's a lot more to know, but it's a very encouraging thing when we're taught so much we're carbon-based, but we're really water-based. And I think that by understanding that and looking into the realm of water, it really does make you recognize something that we are so sophisticated. And to end, someone was asking me about tears and emotions. So what are emotions? So when we explain emotion, we always say, oh, well, I've got this face for being happy, and I have this face for being sad, and this face for being angry, and it's because this person made me feel like this, or whatever we do. But you can't see an emotion outside of the expression that we make on our faces. But our body's so sophisticated that in our deepest sorrow, when we cry, and what I say is tears really are emotion you can both see, taste, and touch. But when we cry, our human face is designed in such a perfect way that tears come out of our eyes, they roll around our cheeks, and they're designed to go back into our mouth, because the tears have been structurally reordered to help heal our hearts. They become a medicine. This is how amazing we are as beings of water and light.
Veda, you have gone to new levels that I was completely unaware of and never even imagined. And just as I think it was Hope said, wow. So you've all been dosed by now water, and this session is about the empathy of water. And so for us each to understand, as Veda has said, we are just all water. And for us to be first and foremost empathic with self and taking care of ourselves and healing and caring for ourselves. And then as we are healed, we're able to do that for others and to heal others and to give them love, to be open in our hearts. And water is the element that enables that. As Veda shared about the 4 elements, water is the element of emotion. And yes, fascinating that our tears, whether they're from sadness or from joy, of course, are water and expressed in water. And I actually had this vision, Veda, as you talked about the tears coming down and coming in to our mouth, is actually a heart, the shape of a heart. Yeah. You know, once again, coming back to love. And by the way, when you think about this, our tears are salty. And that's, most people never really think about that, but it's similar to the water in the mother's womb. The amniotic fluid is salt water. It's the closest thing to seawater. Mm. So we just come back to this whole point of empathy, and that water does share with us all of the messages of life, as you have seen, which are way beyond the mind. We can't comprehend this that's there. And we haven't talked yet in our time together as emissaries about what's called the anomalies of water. And there's, I don't know whether it's 40, 70, there's
something around 65, 69
of that cannot be explained by us, by science, by quantum physics, by thermodynamics. It's just beyond the mind. So I know we've Veda could go on for, as you can hear, hours and hours, if not days and weeks.
Yeah.
Yet here we are at a place where we'd love for you to just give any thoughts, feedback, questions, whatever you have. And we know some of you may need to leave, and if you do, we understand that. The other thing, that Veda does have a course, which if you could just tell them real quickly about the course that she does, that you can do this at home, and she shows and instructs you how to be able to do this on your own. And she has offered generously and graciously to share with you all as emissaries the course and give you a discount. So it only costs you, I think, $20 to be able to do the course. So Veda, can you just tell us about quickly, and then please I want any of you to be able to comment, share, question, whatever you have for Veda.
Sure. I mean, the course is just where everyone's freezer setting is different, and the hardest part about doing the work is understanding when it's the right time to pull the ice out of the freezer. And so when I do a demonstration, and usually what happens is that everyone will have a petri dish, and where I'm able to do it with you. So you go, you freeze it, you photograph it, I make sure you've got the right amount of water in the dish, you know what you're looking for. And everyone that also gets my list of hydroglyphs, as well as what's called my CMP guide, which teaches my technique, so that you can look back at that, and everyone also gets the video. So for you guys, it's probably, because I've got a course coming up, a workshop on Saturday, and it's basically almost at capacity now. So what I can do though is, maybe you can help organize it, Stuart. It's just around, like, I can do a private group for you, and we can kind of do it together if you're interested. But actually, it was very interesting you talk about salt water, because salt's another thing that I've studied a great deal. And I always think that it's salt that is a crystal. Crystals store information in all of our technology, but it's also electrical. And so when we think about that, it's a dissolved crystal, so we're liquid crystal, and we're a liquid antenna collecting information from the external world and bringing it into our cells. And then it's picked up by the fourth phase water in our cells and transmitted and transmuted into information. And so when you think about that, how do we store memories? Like, this began an hour or whatever ago, an hour and a half ago. It's now a memory. Everything in our life, from the moment we're born, is a recorded memory in us. It's all a memory. From the moment we had breakfast to everything, and all of those things, we have to think back and look back, and it's a memory now. We're bodies full of memories. So one of the most important things I recognized after after my mum's passed and after a dear friend of mine passed last year, is that what they did is leave amazing memories of themselves inside of me. And so I think one of the greatest gifts we can give as empathetic, kind people and individuals is to be a beautiful memory in the heart of someone else, because that is what they're going to take away with them. And that's what we carry, because we are memory, and I think it's the salt in the water of our bodies that helps store that information. Water is the observer, but when it comes into the body, what I think it is then able to store that information of the human being, of our thoughts and our visions. There's not one single thing in the world that we actually interact with that's not felt inside of us. When we hear something, we hear through our ears. When we see something, we see it through the lens of our eyes. When we touch something, we feel it through into our body. When we taste something, we're taking it inside of ourselves. When we say something, it's vibrating through us. There isn't anything actually that we experience outside of this body. And this is a body of water and minerals and consciousness. And my friend Moses Hackman said, what if water is the glove on the hand of consciousness? To me, I think they're so intimately intertwined that they almost behave as one. And I think water is the observer, because we can observe ourselves. How do we do that? We forget about the water in the air. We're this liquid water here, within this body, but we give off electrical charge. And the water in the air adheres to that electrical charge and actually works kind of like a spider web does, where we can feel energy and we can feel what room feels like, where we can feel what that person feels like, because our webs are interacting with each other and with the other information that's in a room. To me, this all just makes so much sense. And when I've interviewed 3 people that had near-death experiences, and I think that there are kind of 2 waters in people. The kind of water that flows through us and that hydrates us and shares holds memories, but also this drop of essence water, this drop of consciousness within us. And I think that that drop of conscious expression adheres to our electrical charge. And when we, and that's why it can move, which is why we can observe ourselves. It's why we can lucid dream and have astral travel projections. And so when anyone has left their body in a near-death experience, they've said they feel themselves rising. Now that's what happens when a gas expands, it cools as well, which is why people feel spirit as cold. And so this essence of us is able to move out in and out of the body through this kind of, be held by this kind of electrical charge, which is like the silver thread some people talk about. And so what these people have said is they'll look down upon their bodies and they'll go, oh, I hope that person's going to be okay. They've stopped being in the body and become the observer, which is what I always think of water as the observer. When it comes into this body and it has this expression of consciousness within it, that expression of consciousness shares information, and we store and hold all these memories in that way. Again, I've gone on a tangent, everyone, sorry. But I think it's so interesting.
Yes, thank you, Veda. Okay, who's got a comment, question? Hopefully you all haven't been silenced by this this magnificent understanding now of how powerful water is and how powerful we are.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Have you ever done attempts? Well, yes, I've done a lot of different languages. One of the reasons I know that there is the dagger glyph is because I used the word pugione, which is Latin for dagger, and I got the dagger glyph. But I started seeing daggers in other people's crystallography, and I wanted to understand what that meant, and it led on from there. So water doesn't read words. Water reads the energy of the word, which is why it understands all languages and symbols.
Speechless, yes. Okay, Gargi, you've got a question?
Yeah, so there's a river in our country where the water is considered has healing properties and is considered pure. Have you tried using the water of the river Ganga? I'm just curious.
Well, I wish that I had. The times when I've been to India was prior to me becoming a researcher. But
Okay.
someone did send me a little vial of Ganga water. I just wished I'd been able to collect it myself. And what I did was I poured some of it into a tiny, one drop of it into tap water, and it transformed it. Its crystallography, I could have sworn, would have come straight from a beautiful, pristine spring. So I call that water seed water. It seeds energy into other water. So it's one of the kind of different types of medicines. There's the kind of medicine waters that drink and heal you in one way, and then there's the kind of medicine waters that you submerge yourself in that have that energetic property. So absolutely, I think that it is also one of our beautiful medicine rivers in the world.
Yes.
And it's very, very potent and powerful.
Yeah, and Gartya, there's a lot of people that have done other studies with the Ganges,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
even
yeah.
though
Bacteriophages, like, yeah.
yeah, the spirit is so
Yeah.
high there that water is just so alive and filled with energy and love.
Thank you.
Who's next?
I had a question about so like when at the very beginning of your presentation you showed like the salt water and it had the fish in it. Have you done anything else with salt water? Like have you tried to use words or talk to it or any other things?
Yeah, I mean, I've pretty much done a lot of almost everything you can imagine. So within salt water, I've used some different words. I've seen many different aspects of what the animals that flow in the water and live in the sea. So crabs, dolphins, whales, moorfish, even like what looks like a kind of mermaid-like creature, all different kinds of things. I've actually seen all kinds of stuff in there. You can't have 36,000 photos without having done a great deal of stuff. But it's interesting you asked because seawater has got that electrical charge in it. And so it has that interesting information. Whenever I teach people how to do the work, I always tell people to observe what patterns your water forms naturally before you have any expectation of water to do anything for you. So seawater tends to form patterns, which, I can't explain them easily, but I do it in the workshops. I kind of show examples of different signature patterns of water. And why it's so important that you see that is that when it does something completely out of character, like design a face or show hydroglyphs, you can see that there has been an intentional change. And when you see that happen, it's really quite incredible. So I've done ketone water as well, which is really a special type of water that actually helped heal my body years ago from a disease. So, and that forms incredible crystallography as well. So seawater is one of the waters in which I like to play with and use. Mostly with my work, though, I like to use spring water that I've collected if possible, or rainwater is great. And even tap water, it's not that you're drinking it, it's just that we're using the tap. Tap water is an amazing control to use. If you get to know what your tap water looks like, do 10 or 12 tests, see what the structures look like without doing anything. And then put it into a singing bowl and play it. And then take some of that same tap water that's been in the singing bowl and freeze it. You'll see that ferns will start to form, hexagonal patterns or flower shapes will form because it's starting to heal. It has an energetic healing that happens. And I kind of put tap water akin to someone who's maybe sick because you have a choice of being happy or sad. And if somebody comes to you and gives you a hug and says something nice to you, you're going to feel happier. And so it's likely that there's a structural change that then happens within the person, although the doctor may well say, well, you're still sick. There's not a chemical change in the tap water, but there is a structural change, and the structural change is kind of akin to emotion. So it shows that when you are kind to someone and then they respond in a way which makes them feel good, it's actually likely making a structural change. And any positive change when you're not well, it can make massive change if you keep doing that. So yeah, definitely there's a lot to be seen in seawater if people can get it.
Great question. Who else?
Has it ever shown you something you haven't recognized? For example, possibly something we haven't discovered yet, maybe in the deep ocean. Yes, well, I drowned when I was 14, and I had a very interesting experience, which could only be termed as either a near out-of-body experience or an actual experience. I I used to ride horses, and my friend's dad took the horses back, and my friend and I ran down to the beach. I wasn't really that familiar with that area that well, and it got deep really quick in the ocean, and I felt something around my ankle pull me down, and I couldn't remember anything, but my body was missing for 3 hours, so I obviously hadn't drowned for that long. And someone saw my body, found it, resuscitated me, and I remember coming around, going to hospital, and my mother said that 100 meters up the beach, 2 dolphins were found washed up, and they had been slashed. And I remember when she told me that, I was so mortified, because I knew I had some connection with them, and something had happened during that time. And only a few years ago, I never talked about it. I was nearly 14 at the time. And I only just started talking about it about 4 years ago. And I did a regression to try to remember what I saw or what happened. And I mean, that's probably going to go on for another half an hour. But it really, it was profound. And what I said I saw was another being in the water looking at me. And I had an experience from there, which was pretty remarkable. And I don't think we barely know anything about what is in our oceans. And so I have seen, when I asked the water to show me who pulled me down, that was when I saw what looked like this human type person with all the same features that I had remembered seeing, because he had some bioluminescence around his face so I could still see. And he was wondering why I was drowning, because I wasn't meant to. And so a lot of stuff happened in that experience, which was remarkable. But it made me come to understand whether it was a near-death experience and I was remembering that, or whether it was real. I think there's a fine line these days between knowing really what's going on in the world, and especially in the world of water. So I would say that there is probably all number of intelligent beings that live in the water. And one of the things I want to do is go much deeper into that conversation with water and see what happens. I can never go to this willy-nilly kind of, oh, let's ask this and this. I have about 1,000 people ask me 1,000 questions. And it always has to be what feels right and what the highest expression is going to be. So, thank you so much. You're welcome. No worries.
So anyone else have a bubbling question for Veda before we go? Wes, you do?
Yeah, just a comment that in both dealing with water and I deal a lot with neuroscience too. And the way that memories are stored in the brain is as patterns. So that when we remember something, what we do is actually put that pattern back together that's stored. And so it's interesting that I even wrote a couple of papers about the possibility of using pattern as a language that transcends, various kinds of verbal languages and things like that might be more understandable to more people from different backgrounds and different professions. So that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Anyone else? Well, all we can say is thank you. Thank you, Veda. Thank you, Water. And we'd love to be able to share, if you could you put in the chat there any link about the course you have that's coming up that they can attend?
It's just on my website, and if you go to workshops, you have to click on the time, the date and the time, and then you can get taken to the link. It's just my website is just vedaustin.com, and then you just go to workshops and you'll see it there. But if it's entirely up to you, but I'm more than happy to do a private group thing, and we can kind of, it'll be cheaper. It's usually it's $50 for the beginner's course, but I can make it 20 if there is a few people on. So and I normally just do that for special groups like this where people are genuinely trying to learn more, and it always, you know, it helps me too. I mean, it's not just me that can do this. I'm still learning. I feel like seriously like an infant half the time, just still trying to like figure out how to crawl with this stuff. So I think it's really important that other people can see the work, get the relationship with water, and you know, and also see these hydroglyphs, because what people are helping me with is the layers of meaning. So if you get a hydroglyph and use a different word, it's likely that it's a layer of meaning. So then I can go through and do a whole range more using that word.
It's endless.
It is.
Yeah, and it's really such a gift for us to be able to see and feel this dimension of water that is beyond our minds and knowingness, and really allowing us to get in touch with its essentially energy that is here, that's infinite, that's always here. So we will get back to you, and I think I would love to arrange us or our group to be able to have a session with you, and you can show us how to work with the water and freeze the water, and you know, attune our freezer in the way that it needs to be. I'm getting some shaking heads. They're interested. So
we can send out an email with a Google form asking people about interest and time. We'll send this after those sessions so we can set that up for everybody.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Well, I'll leave that with you guys.
Thank you, Veda.
You're welcome. But I really have to go now. So thank you to everybody so much. I'm so glad that you're excited about water, and I honor each and every single one of you, and I'm showering you with so much love.